Okay, so this is a pretty simple project. What we're going to do here is have a form. It's basically a login form, and the length of the password is going to be detected, and this image, it's going to start off blurry, and as the password gets longer and stronger, this is going to become more clear. So you'll see if I go ahead and enter one character, it gets a little more clear, another, and eventually it just ends up as a completely clear image. So it's a cool little way to test password strength. Now this is obviously very simple. It's only going by the password length. You could add on to this after, and you could see if there's special characters or uppercase letters and numbers and all that, but this is going to be pretty simple to begin with. We're also going to be using the Tailwind CSS framework, and we're just using a CDN. We're not going to download it or compile it or anything like that. We're not using NPM. We're just going to throw the CDN link in so we can use some of the classes and make the styling a little easier on us. All right, so you'll get a little bit of experience with some of the Tailwind utility classes in this project as well. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so let's get started on our password image strength project, whatever you want to call it. We'll go ahead and just call this password strength background. Now this is going to be a little different because we're actually going to use Tailwind CSS, which is a framework, a CSS framework, just so we don't have to actually write a lot of CSS, and it's just a really cool framework. We're not going to get deep into it and get and compile it or anything like that. We're just going to use a CDN. So if we go to cdnjs.com and just type in Tailwind, we want to grab this and this right here, this Tailwind min.css. We're going to copy that link tag and let's put that right above our custom style CSS, and we'll save that. You can see the font already changed, and we're now using the default Tailwind CSS. So for the HTML, let's close this first of all. Actually, we'll open up the rest of our files here and then close that. And let's get rid of this H1 here. So I want to have a background image that we can work with to add that blur effect to. So I'm going to have a div here with the class of background and also an ID of background. And nothing's going to go inside of it. We're just going to use that for the background. And then let's have basically a wrapper around everything. And we're going to give this a few Tailwind classes like bg-white. So this is going to be the box in the middle with the form fields. I'm also going to make it rounded, so we'll add rounded. And these are Tailwind classes, so we don't have to actually create the CSS for this. I want some padding, so I'm going to do p-10, which will do padding all around. I want center, so text center, and let's add a shadow to it as well. So shadow, we'll do shadow MD, shadow medium. All right, now, and again, these are Tailwind classes. If you're interested in Tailwind, I have a crash course on YouTube. There's a lot of videos on YouTube. There's paid and free courses. It's a really, really cool framework if you want to look more into it. So here I'm going to have an H1. I'm going to give this a class of text-3XL to make it a little bigger. And inside here, we're just going to say image password strength. You can put whatever you want. I'm just putting that. And then we'll put a paragraph here. I'm going to give this paragraph a class of text-SM, which will make the text smaller, and then text-gray-700, which will give it a shade of gray. And we're just going to say change the password to see the effect. All right, and then under that paragraph, we're going to have a div. Let's give this a class of my. So my in Tailwinds is margin on the y-axis, which is top and bottom. I'm going to do -4, and let's also do text-left. And in this div here, we're going to have our label and our input for the email. So let's just go down here a little bit. Let's add a label. So the label is going to have a class. We'll do text-gray-900. And in this label, we're just going to say email. Oops. Well, yeah, we can say for email, and then inside here, we want to say email. And then under that label, we're going to have our input. So this input is going to have a few classes. We're going to have border. Let's do block. So it's a block level. It reaches all the way across. Let's make sure the width is full. So W-full. Padding, we'll do P2. I want some margin on the top. So MT-2. And I want it rounded. So I'm going to add the rounded class. Okay. And then we want to have a few other attributes. So we have input type text and then the classes. I'm also going to add an ID of email, and I'm going to add a placeholder as well, and just say enter email. Alright, so that should be good. Let's actually put a colon after the label. So you can see over here we have our email. Now we want to do the password, so I'm going to copy this div that wraps the label and the input, and let's put that here and just change this to password. Let's change the type to password, and the classes here we can actually just leave those, the ID, password, and the placeholder, enter password. Alright, so now we have our two fields. The last thing we want is the button. So let's go outside of this div here, and let's put in a button here. So this is going to have quite a few classes. I want BG-black, and let's do text-white. And for padding, let's do PY, so padding on the top and bottom 2, and let's do margin top to push it down a bit. We'll do MT2. And I want to display this, actually let's do MT4, and I want this to be an inline block, so we'll add the inline block class, and let's do width-full and rounded. Okay, so those are the classes we want. For the text, we'll just say submit, and let's give it a type of submit as well, even though it doesn't really matter, but we'll just go ahead and save that. Good. All right. So now for the custom CSS, let's go to our style sheet. A lot of the styling is already there from the Tailwind utility classes, but we want to give it that background image with the blur. So as far as what we have in our default styling, I'm just going to get rid of the font. We don't need to include that because Tailwind has its own font. And then for the styling of the background, remember we have a class of background. And all that is a div at the top, right? So we want this to cover everything, and we want to add the background image to that. So let's first of all set the background image. So I'm just going to set background to a URL, and the image link I'm going to paste in. And you can, if you want to use the same image, you can just, you can either copy this or you can get it from the repository. Let's set it to no repeat, and let's set the positioning to center on the X and Y axis, and then cover for the background size. Now we're not going to see anything just yet because it's just an empty div. We want to position this to be absolute, and we want to set, I'm going to set the top to be a little further than the edge, so we'll do -20 pixels, and let's set bottom to -20. We're going to set it on all sides, so top, bottom, left -20, and right -20. And if I do that, we're going to see the image here. Now it's covering the login box, which obviously we don't want, so we'll just change the z-index. Let's make the z-index to -1, and then the login box will be on top of it. Now I want to start the image out to be blurred, and then the longer the password gets, the less of a blur the image will have. So in CSS we have this filter property, and we're going to use blur, and we're going to set it to 20 pixels blur, like that. So basically the higher this is, if I set this to 30, it's going to be even more blurry, but we're going to set it to 20. 0 obviously is no blur, 10 is a little blurry, but we're going to set this to 20 to start off with. Okay, so that's all we need to do for the HTML and CSS. In the next video, we're going to do the JavaScript, which should be really, really quick. It's only like 9 lines of code or something like that. All right, so we'll do that next. Okay, so now we want to add the JavaScript here, and this is actually an area where you could pause the video and try to do this yourself. So basically, as we start to type, the longer the password length is, the less blurry we want the image to be. And remember, it starts at 20 pixels. So you essentially want to subtract from that 20 pixels whatever the length of the password is, and then multiply that by 2. That's going to be the math that we'll be using here. So if you want to try it yourself, you can do that, but I'm going to go ahead and start and bring in, first of all, the password input. So let's call this variable password and document dot get element by ID, and we should have an ID of password. Let me just double check, make sure I put that. Yep, so ID of password. And the other thing we want is the background, which is this div here, and that has an ID of background. So let's also grab that, and we'll call this background. All right, now we need an event listener on the password input. So let's take that password input and let's add an event listener onto it, and we want to listen for any input and then fire off a function. So I'm going to use an arrow function. We're going to pass e in here, the event parameter, because we need to get the value. So let's say const input, and let's set that to e.target.value. Okay, so that way we get the input, and we'll just go ahead and test it with a console log here. And let's open up our console. Just get rid of that. And as soon as I start to type, it will show whatever we're typing, whatever that input is. Now the next thing we want is the length of the input. So let's create another variable here called length and set that to whatever the input dot length is. And we can go ahead and console log the length. And here you'll see it'll just give us the length. And then we're going to take the 20, that's what we have the blur set to initially, and we want to subtract from that the length. Let's console.log this. All right, so if I type in here, you'll see we get 19, 18, 17. So I actually want to multiply that by 2 so that we get, if I have one character, we get 18, 16, 14, 12, because I want it to go down by 2 each time. And then when we get, start getting here, we pass 0 and we go negative. So what I'm going to do is put this into a variable. We'll call this blur value. And then we'll take the background, and we want to edit the filter property, this is the CSS filter property. So we'll say style.filter, and we're going to set that to, let's use a template literal here, so use backticks, and set it to blur. So what we're doing is it's just essentially setting this value right here, the filter and the blur, and instead of 20 pixels, we're going to use whatever the blur value is. So we'll pass in blur value, and then be sure to just add pixels after that. All right, so now if we go back here, I'm going to close that up and I start to type. So I'll just type something in. You can see it got a little less blurry. So it should be at what, 18 now, then 16, 14, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, and 0. So now, and anything negative obviously will still, it'll be a clear image. Okay, now this is a really good project for you to expand upon. Right now it's just testing the length of the password, but you could test for things like special characters and numbers and all that, and you could use like regular expressions. There's a whole load of things that you could do, but I think it's a good project to add on to. But that's all we're going to do for now, so I will see you in the next one.